NBC's Jim Miklashevsky is covering this case for us. We want to start with you, Mick. What is the reaction from the Pentagon?
Well, the reaction from the Pentagon so far, it depends on who you talk to. Some think the sentence is too light. Some think it's just right. But what's interesting about this case, clearly, as you mentioned, Abby, Bradley Manning broke the law by illegally dispersing classified information to somebody not within the realm of the legal process here in the Pentagon to possess it. So that is a violation of the law. But you could tell by the way that the military judge, that Colonel Denise Lind, that she wasn't buying the prosecution's argument that he aided the enemy. In fact, she found Bradley Manning not guilty of that most serious charge. And it also appears that she didn't buy the argument that Bradley Manning caused serious damage or somehow threatened United States security or intelligence. Because after all, the prosecution had asked for 60-year sentence. She gave Bradley Manning 35, as you say, eligible for parole within 10 years, but he could be out within 7 years for good conduct while being held at the military prison there in Fort Leavenworth. The civil libertarians are up in arms, however, because they think this will have a very chilling effect on future leakers or whistleblowers, and they're calling it the Snowden effect, after Edward Snowden, who released all that NSA information and then sought refuge outside the country. So there's a deep concern that because many feel that this country in part relies on leaks to reveal any wrongdoing or misgivings within our government, that this trial alone and some very aggressive prosecutions by the Obama administration are going to dry up leaks about U.S. wrongdoing.
Nick, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, joining us now is Bradley Manning's friend, Zach Pesavento. He's the former spokesman for the Bradley Manning Support Network. Zach, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, as you know, the country has been extremely divided on Manning's case. Just to give people a sense, a recent poll, obviously the pre-sentencing poll, shows that only 13% say Manning should not be sentenced to prison at all, but more responders agreed that Manning was in the wrong, not necessarily a traitor, but they're incredibly divided, as you can see here, on the number of years they think he should serve in prison. I'm curious, Zach, what your response is from the verdict today.
Well, I think, in light of the tremendous amount of time that he was facing, initially upwards of over a century in prison, I think, relatively speaking, looking at that, you can say that this is somewhat of a tactical victory, but there's no question here that what happened today was a miscarriage of justice. I think when we roll back the clock about 40 years and look at the last big prosecution of a major whistleblower, Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, that case was thrown out of court after the government broke into his psychiatrist's office to try to get into his medical records. And so in this case, we had much more egregious violations of Manning's rights. Not only the time he was held in Kuwait and at the now shuttered Quantico Marine Brig, but also due process violations. The case should have been thrown out, and so that's why we're going to be pressing forward with this case to have this sentence commuted and free Bradley Manning.
You mentioned Daniel Ellsberg, and of course, as you mentioned, that was thrown out and he received no jail time accordingly. But other big prosecutions of leakers in the national security context have also had relatively lower prison terms. Sam Morrison, 2 years. Lawrence Franklin, 10 months. Thomas Drake, who was also a surveillance leaker, struck a plea deal in 2011 with no prison time. Others getting anywhere from 20 months to 2.5 years. So as people try to process this information, the actual sentence of 35 years isn't double or triple what we've seen in the recent era. It's, literally 10 times. And that shows that even though the judge rejected some of these claims, and we now have a judicial finding from a military court that there was not grave national security harm, the country can continue to debate that, but it's pretty interesting to have a military judge find that that was not the cause of Bradley Manning's leaks. What do you make of this rather long sentence by any objective historical standard?
Well, Brad has already spent, as we've stated, about 3 years in custody now without trial, and that's longer than some of the people involved in the My Lai massacre in Vietnam spent under house arrest. And as Brad's attorney David Coombs noted after court today, he's represented people who have murdered people and done all kinds of terrible things, who have gotten far less time. But then in this case we have someone who was clearly motivated out of a sense of duty to his fellow Americans to try to expose wrongdoing, and in retaliation for that he's being given this extremely harsh sentence. So you're absolutely right, it doesn't make sense.
Zach, I think there's a lot right to what you're saying. People have noted that there are people who have tortured in recent American history and not suffered any prison time for that. But there are critics on the other side who point out, and your response to this, the military is a special organization in society, especially American life. They keep us safe. And if you have every soldier able to take information and give it to whoever they want, then you're sort of having every soldier having veto power over the military functioning, and you're challenging the ability of the military to even be able to function in society. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that there's a number of issues involved in this case. There's the massive problem with overclassification, where the government is just reflexively classifying any number of things, not just war crimes, but stuff that isn't even interesting at all. And so I think that that's something that we need to look at there. In this. Brad also didn't really have any recourse. There was at one point that he tried to go expose, for example, that there were Iraqi academics that were being turned over to Prime Minister al-Maliki's security forces, and he was almost certain that they were being tortured. And he tried to go report this to his commanding officer, and his commanding officer told him to shut up. And so I think that this is the kind of experience that countless numbers of people in the military have come across, and so really there really isn't any other option these days than to rely on our First Amendment right to go to the freedom of the press. And that's really the lifeblood of national security journalism, are these sorts of leaks, and they happen every day. Leon Panetta revealed one of the members of SEAL Team 6 to a Hollywood producer. He didn't get 35 years in prison. He got a $3 million book deal. And so I think, if they're really, if the administration really wants to prosecute everyone who's made a leak with 35 years in prison, I don't really know how many people are going to be left in Washington after that crackdown is over.
Well, in fact, one of the defenses that you and others of Bradley, other supporters of Bradley, have said is that the release of the documents, there's no proof that it harmed national security. But as you know, Bradley Manning read a short sentencing statement in which he essentially apologized, saying, "I'm sorry for the unintended consequences of my actions. When I made these decisions, I believed I was going to help people, not hurt people." How do you think that Bradley himself views his actions today?
Well, I never have had the chance to actually meet Brad. I just wanted to clarify earlier. We do share a number of friends in common, however, and among this circle of people, you've got a whole spectrum of politically engaged individuals, ranging from advocates and activists like myself to people with high-level security clearances just like Brad. And so, there's no question in my mind that there are people in government who really do care about wanting to protect innocent people. Now, we have to remember that there were large parts of this trial that were conducted entirely in secret, and so we can only speculate as to what may have been said during these parts of the trial. I think it's important to note that we can't rule out the possibility that the administration, in responding to the WikiLeaks disclosures, didn't take some additional measures to try to protect certain individuals. But I think it's important to drive home the point, the fact that was established clearly in court and that was accepted by the judge, which is that no one has been harmed or killed as a result of WikiLeaks.
Well, Zach Pesavento, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.